All right. I assume that means we're live and ready to go. This is all right, and I got my cue to get started. So good evening, everyone. From Boston College, my name is Crystal Tiala, and I'm an associate professor in theater and chair of the Boston College Arts Council. My connection to this topic tonight is that I have run a prison arts outreach program with students from Boston College, so I'm happy to have these wonderful guests with us tonight. A little bit of business to begin. I welcome you to the show at 6, BC and the Common Good. The show at 6 features friends and members of the BC community discussing a range of issues affecting our world today, all revolving around the theme of the common good. Topics include how the BC community is responding to the effects of COVID-19, to the enduring challenges of the marginalized, to our own resiliency and solidarity, and to the upbuilding of human dignity throughout the world. The show is based on the central insight of the common good that is the resource that humanity has and needs and must be shared equitably. For instance, today each of us is called to promote the common good by social distancing, wearing masks, by washing our hands. These practices, like other forms of solidarity, are not only for our own good, but for the common good. At 6:40, my co-host and I will ask our questions from the audience. Members of the audience can pose questions before 6:40 p.m. via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please identify yourself by your name and your relationship to Boston College, and again, pose your questions before 6:40 via Q&A button. My co-host this evening is the lovely Celeste Wells, an associate professor of the practice in the Department of Communication, the director of the department's honors program. Celeste has written about the experience of families of the incarcerated, as well as working with students who have incarcerated parents or siblings. And now, for the meat of our program, I get the honor of introducing Sister Maureen Clark, a Sister of St. Joseph. She is a native of Pittsburgh and worked there in the correction system for 13 years before her 26 years of service in Massachusetts. Most of her time in correction, she served in the capacity of chaplain, working with the female offender population. Through her ministry, she created programs that help reconcile and reunify women with their children and families, such as the Read to Me Mommy program, later implemented in prisons nationwide, where women read books to their children on a DVD. She also runs a robust aftercare program, preparing women for release and providing support afterwards. She's also served on the Massachusetts Governor's Advisory Board for Prisons and on the Boston Catholic Archdiocese Board on Prisons. In 2013, she received an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Fairfield University in Connecticut to honor her, quote, unwavering dedication to those forgotten by society, and with respect for her belief that everyone deserves dignity, hope, and a second chance, unquote. And I'm happy to have said I work with her often and love working with her. And now I will hand it over to Celeste to introduce our other esteemed guest, Mike Frank.
Hello, everyone. And first of all, Mike, can you give us a little wave? Everybody see you? There he is. Mike is a board-certified internal medicine physician practicing at Denver Health, which is in Denver, Colorado. Michael earned his Bachelor of Arts in International Studies at Boston College in 2007. After college, he volunteered in El Salvador, at Allendale Farm in Brookline, and also as an emergency medical technician at Cataldo Ambulance Services, servicing families and individuals in the Boston's northern suburbs. Mike matriculated at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, receiving his Doctor of Medicine in 2015, and was recognized with membership at with Alpha Omega Alpha, and also the Gold Humanism Honor Societies. He completed his internal medicine residency also at the University of Colorado School of Medicine in 2018. His research on relapse to smoking in people recently released from prison is published in the Journal of Smoking Cessation. Mike currently works as a primary care clinician at the Federally Qualified Health Center within Denver Health, which provides health care for 1/3 of Denver's population. He teaches medicine to medical students and residents, and most recently, he's the lead physician in a community transitions clinic, which expedites and specializes in care for those who are being released from prison and from jail into the community. So I think we'd like to jump right in with our questions, and Crystal is going to start us off with our first question.
Great. Before we actually start, I just want to give a little caveat about questions. In no way do our guests represent the Department of Corrections. They have restrictions on things we can talk about, institutional questions. Probably we can focus more on the work of these individuals and what they are personally doing, so we'll direct our questions that way. If you want statistics or demographics on the Department of Corrections in Massachusetts, Brian, one of our co-hosts, just posted a link where you can go and get the information about those demographics online, so we don't have to deal with those here. All right, here we go. So it's a question for both of you. Maybe we'll start with Sister Maureen. Both of you are familiar with Boston College, and many of our students have heard Father Hines say that one of our responsibilities is to ask, what am I good at, and what does the world need me to do? So it would be wonderful if you could just briefly share why you saw your calling as work with the incarcerated population. Maureen, do you want to just get us started?
Sure. Some of my earliest memories of, I've been doing this for about over 40 years, so I'm trying to remember back when it got me going. I'm a sister of St. Joseph, and as the Sisters of St. Joseph, we have a great desire to serve the poor and the marginal. And in our early histories, actually, in France, we worked among the people on the street making lace. And we sat with people who were going in prison or who were in prison. And it just is very interesting to me that it was so much a part of our history since 1650. One of the big parts of our community also is to try to respond to the great need, to see what's the greatest need in our society, where other people do not care to go or want to serve. And so when I stepped into the prison, it was very clear to me that it was a great need, and there were not a lot of people there who were willing to help out. Early on, very early on, probably the first week in prison, I prayed to God saying, you got the wrong gal. No. When I had a week of trauma and crisis at my door every time somebody knocked at the door. Homelessness, going back to broken relationships, health, addictions, you name it. People are in such trauma and suffer greatly in prison. So I listened to what God said to me, and God's answer to me was to send me all kinds of people, like Crystal, who said yes when I asked for help to serve that giant population. So that was what got me there, seeing the need and seeing that there was very, very few people responding. And then these wonderful volunteers who come in, they're willing to look at the situation with me and say, but what more can we do to make this different, to make this better, that people's lives they can leave this prison better people and have their life back.
How about you, Mike?
So for me, trying to understand what got me here, I'd probably have to go back and start during like formation in Jesuit institutions. So I went to a Jesuit high school, I went to a Jesuit university. And so from experiences there with friends, retreats, different service opportunities, that kind of awakened something in me that, your internal life didn't always have to remain internal. I kind of came from a family where we didn't necessarily like talk about it, whatever whatever was going on inside. So a lot of those opportunities awakened me to people's interior lives, suffering, marginalization, and hopelessness. And so throughout high school, Boston College in particular, I started just following one opportunity after another to understand a little bit more what it was like for people who were on the margins or vulnerable. So from Pulse class, working with people at the St. Francis Center, runs a homeless foot clinic for Boston, going to the rehab hospital at Franciscan Children's, so on and so forth, studying abroad in El Salvador, studying abroad in Kenya, and going up to northern Kenya where there are pastoralists who are trying to make a living, doing things that few people have the opportunity to do. I think I've been on a search just trying to understand more about suffering, and I think I'm not necessarily searching for some sort of meaning that's hidden. I think these experiences make me feel alive and make me feel a little bit more what it's like to be human and to understand other people. Joseph Campbell is a good mythologist and writer, and he says that what people are seeking is really not the meaning of life, but the rapture of being alive. And so I feel like I've been seeking those experiences out, and that's what drives me to medicine. And now that I'm here, it's kind of like, why not? This is a population in need, and that I think that I can work with well for the foreseeable future.
I hear you. I feel the same way every time I walk into the prison. I feel alive. We're very alive there. It's a great feeling.
Our next question actually revolves around the media, and maybe Mike, maybe you can take this one first. As you know, the media plays a central role in perpetuating the belief that those that are incarcerated are either fundamentally deviant, morally bankrupt, or perhaps even mentally ill. And certainly while both whether being incarcerated or freely walking the streets, all populations have a percentage of people who experience or fall into these categories. The thing that we're concerned about is the media really only shares these depictions of individuals that are incarcerated. So what I'd like to ask you is, what do you think that the media in general is missing in their accounts of the identities of incarcerated that's crucial for an informed public to understand? What are we not seeing?
We're not seeing a whole lot. And it's, I think once one begins working with this population, humanizing them, understanding their stories, their background, their struggles and contexts, it's really shocking how small of a view we get from the media. So it could be a range of things, and I'll kind of just go down some of the structural things that I think are not talked about, but then maybe highlight one story of working with individuals in my clinic as we help people in the pursuit of health after reentry. One thing that we don't really see from the media is that this is a reflection of us as a society. We don't see ourselves being held accountable for having mass incarceration. This is something that everyone, most people have voted for, Republicans and Democrats alike throughout the 1980s, 90s, 2000s to get tough on crime, resulting in mass incarceration going from 300,000 people in our behind bars to over 2 million people. And so this is a sense of what we do with people who are the most marginalized. And I think that we're lacking that we are a part of this. It's somehow different than us and it's their problem, and we don't take ownership of it. I think one thing that we miss is how steeped in racism this whole entire system is. From before incarceration and law enforcement, in sentencing cases, and then afterwards, how we have state-sanctioned discrimination of folks in housing, student loans, voting, jury duty, employment, having to check the box for the next however many years prevents people from actually having a decent shot at being able to rebuild their lives. So there's a whole list of those sort of things that are really different. Media likes to highlight violent crime, but 95% of people in prison, or a great majority, are not really there for violent reasons. We like to think that these people will never come back, but 95% of people in prison are going to come back to the community. So what's our responsibility as a society to make sure that people return to the community and have a shot at success. So those are some of the structural things, and I'm sure that we'll be able to look at those a little bit more as the evening goes on. Working with people personally, I'm really impressed. You know, I have some of my hardest working patients who are folks who are getting released. They're organizing information. Some folks are kind of discharged with less than nothing. I'll share one story now about a man who was released on special parole due to the coronavirus pandemic because of his medical comorbidities. And he was told that he would be released after 37 years incarcerated, 4 days before he got released. Was put on a bus and then said, you will parole in this city. Went to that city. The parole office said, you're not paroling here. Got on a bus, went to another city. They said, no, you got it wrong. You'll parole over there. Got to that city. Nope, you're not here. And then it was late at night. They give him a voucher in order to obtain a hotel. The hotels, he went to 5, wouldn't accept it. So he cashed it in. I don't know how all this works yet. I'm still much a learner here. Cashed it in, got a cab, said, I've been having fevers for the past 4 months. I've been putting in kites or little memos to the doctors in the prison to get seen, and I haven't been able to see a doctor. I feel really bad. He gets admitted with a heart valve infection. He's on my team. He's there for 2 weeks, discharged, has every single need. Housing, no friends. He was incarcerated for 37 years. He's 76 years old. He doesn't have insurance. He doesn't have clothes. He doesn't have money. And I'm still in the process of trying to get him insurance. Since then, he's been hospitalized again for heart block. So that's a life-threatening arrhythmia. And so it's really life or death serious things, but he's someone who I think I've been able to see him go up and down in terms of his hope or discouragement. He's shown a lot of gratitude for the people around him. But then on other moments, this is a person who says, it would just be easier if I just went back to prison. And that's really hard to hear, how we've institutionalized people. The media leaves out a lot of information.
Thank you, Mike. Maureen.
Oh, I don't have a whole lot to say about that, except I am always searching to see if the media would ever tell the truth. You know, the fake news that our president started, I was very critical of that initially. I started to listen a little more closely. I find that the whole idea of human respect, or human dignity, seems to be lacking in the reporting. And I feel like we get partial pieces of maybe what the truth is. The person that Mike spoke about, I started an aftercare program for people like that, which was a lot of the people where I work have nothing to go to when they leave. So we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later. But there was a quote I read from Pope John Paul II. It says, we are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are not the sum of, we are the sum of God's love for us. And our real capacity is to become the image of Jesus. So I just think whatever thing we can do to help affect change in the media, to become more truthful and be able to validate people's lives rather than try to choose the weakness and the offenses being primary, because we're not, I don't think we're the whole of that. There are mistakes in our lives. I don't want to say, I say to the women, this is your life, this big long line, and your time here at this prison is a dot on that line. It's a dot on that line. It's not the whole of who you are. So if there was a way to ever get that across, that our sinfulness and the mistakes we make are not the whole of us, just a part.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I appreciate how both of you have really focused in on the humanity of all people, and that those who are incarcerated are not less human because of where they find themselves in the moment, but that there are often times where we treat them, depict them talk to them as if they are. And I think this folds really nicely into the next question, which what I want to do is talk a little bit about, obviously, incarceration impacts people at almost every level we can imagine, right? Whether it's physical, psychological, social, familial. Once incarcerated, things are never quite the same for someone, and for their bodies and for their minds. And I'm wondering if each of you could talk a few minutes about the programs you have been developing and worked on to try to address the unique problems that the incarcerated population faces. Maureen, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. Crystal mentioned early on, we have a Read to Me Mommy program, which has been just phenomenal. We bring the women in who really are wanting to have communication with their children and their families. We want to help that bond become more solid. And we want them to be able to relate to the community while they're inside the prison, rather than to feel that big divide. And then we kind of trick the women into teaching parenting skills in the middle of it, because we have volunteers teach the program, and they're all mothers. And so the program consists of women coming to a room, talking about their children, talking about the difficulties they're having, sibling rivalry, you name it. And then those wonderful volunteers take those, all those pieces of information from the women, and they go to the library, and they find books on siblings fighting with each other, and all about ballet, or whatever the issue is with their children. And then they bring back those books. And if that's what they want, we practice reading. If that's what they want to send to their child, then we go buy the brand new book. I had a foundation years ago give me a grant, and they called and they said, now, are we to assume that you send home the book with the DVD, with the mother reading the book? And I said, no. And they said, oh, all right, then we're gonna make sure we give you a grant that the book goes with the DVD. And so it's great, it's wonderful. They go into their preschool and their kindergarten and first grade, and they take that DVD and show it to the whole class, and that's my mommy up there. Because in the beginning, she talks about how much she loves them and cares about them. Mom's coming home, and at the end, they read the book together. So anyhow, it's been a great, great program, the Read to Me Mommy program, and it's now Read to Me Daddy in some of the men's prisons as well. Then we have Fully Alive, which Crystal mentioned. The students from BC have been phenomenal coming in. And they do this arts program, which is art, music, dance, drama, poetry. What am I leaving out, Crystal?
Origami, I don't
music,
know,
origami, creative writing, theater games. And it was funny though, when the students first started to come and they said to me, Sister Maureen, they're so good in drama. And I said, well, some of them had great practice in drama before this class. And it's a wonderful meeting of the students with the women that are in the prison, because no one else is there saying to them, how are you? What's going on? Do you like this? Did you ever try this? Helping them gain confidence in themselves, building them up, giving them hope. That's what the BC students do. And they're phenomenal in that they are so talented. They'll come in, and if you work in a prison, sometimes you have everything planned, and then a second before you start, oh no, that's not to happen. That's being canceled. You can't use the room. You don't have the space. And I've been so amazed with them. I'll say to them, no, well, we have to rethink this project. They'll turn around, and 1 second they'll say, we're ready. We're all ready. So their generosity, their lovingness, their affirmation really has brought so much to the prison. So I thank BC, I thank you, Crystal, very much. The other program is our aftercare program, and it's what Mike was talking about, people leaving and everything being gone in their lives. They've lost the relationships. Their families don't want to see them because they ended up stealing from them or doing anything they could to get the money for the drugs and the alcohol. So they've lost family and friends. They've lost those relationships. So they need somebody to help them begin their lives again. So we created 2 different sets of volunteers. One are the aftercare folks, and they just come into the visiting room to meet with our women who are preparing to leave. And the other are our regular volunteers that come in and do programs inside. So by setting up the aftercare program in that way, we're not breaking any prison rules, because volunteers are not to be meeting with women in the prison that they, on the inside. And visitors only go into the visiting room. So when they go into the visiting room, they have already written letters to the women that they're in touch with. They're talking about their future, their planning, their housing, their employment, getting back with their kids, all of those pieces that are so critical and so important. So it's like a real quick glimpse at the aftercare program. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Mike, how about you?
So what we do here at Denver Health is we have a transition clinic, which is meant to assist people in handing over their health care from jail or prison back to the community. And so the structure of that is designed not only to help with access to establishing care and primary care, but also to provide additional navigation or like a community health worker to hold the hands and help an individual navigate health care and a number of other different personal and social needs. So whether it's applying for disabilities, I have a social worker who gives extra time to assist with that, community navigator to give out vouchers for getting around town, getting to appointments, those sorts of things. This model is getting rolled out into different clinics across the United States. So I think the reason for it is because the aside is that as a physician, I have to quote medical literature in every single public presentation I give. So there's a study that shows, that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that shows that the mortality rate and risk of individuals getting released from prison is 12 times that of the general population within the first month that they're released. So, typically when people leave prison, you have HIV, you get 9 days of meds. You have, heart failure, you get 9 days of medications. And so it's on that individual and whatever social support that they can get to scrap together their ongoing care. And so we try to bridge that gap by creating alliances with the Department of Corrections, with different community organizations, and by having someone who's been recently incarcerated serve as a community health worker who has navigated that successfully, so they can serve as that sort of peer support and navigation.
Thank you.
In the news, we've heard a lot about COVID-19 and how it's impacting prisons. One of the saddest things about COVID is that I haven't been able to go in and do our workshops and experience that in a long time, and miss that very much. And I worry about all of the incarcerated persons there and what is happening to them. And I realize you may be limited in things you can say, but can you give us any insights on how things are going with COVID-19 in the prisons that are there? What's going on? And Mike, you might be a good one to start this conversation.
Sure. Like you, not being able to go in or any of the volunteers, the chaplains were not allowed to go in either.
Oh dear.
We were on call. And I received 3 calls, one of which I went in. This whole pandemic has been so difficult for all of us, let alone if you're inside the prison. They cancel visits, they can't see their families. And what happened was the department is struggling to figure out how to keep people safe and well and not have this this whole epidemic overtake the facilities. The inmates were locked down 23 and a half hours a day for, I guess it was 3 months, or they're just coming out of that now. And that was terribly difficult because the half hour they were out was to shower and if they could make a phone call. And then they rotated that schedule, so sometimes it was tricky because the time you were allowed to make a phone call wasn't when your family was by a phone. So it's been a big, big struggle there. But I have to give it to the Department of Corrections. at Framingham, they really worked through that. And I went back to work last week and had the opportunity to meet with one of the shift commanders, the captain that day. And we sat down and talked for an hour. And he said, none of us knew what to do. We just kept taking instructions, following instructions, making suggestions. He said, but we finally got the picture that if somebody's locked down 23 and a half hours, then our job is to be compassionate. And they talked about going from cell to every single person every day to make sure they were okay, to try to respond to their requests. I was very, very pleased to hear that. It was just really very, very nice. So that's kind of the state right now. People are coming out of that lockdown slowly. They're still not totally on the schedule they had been on, but at least they're on their way.
Wow. What's it like from your perspective, Mike?
As a primary care provider, coronavirus has changed a lot of my daily workflow.
That it has.
And I no longer hug my kids immediately when I get home. I have to kind of like sterilize and go from there. You know, from the aspect of individuals, now's a good time to plug a really good program. We were talking about media and accurately portraying the humanity of individuals who find themselves involved in the justice system. And so there's a great podcast called Ear Hustle, which is prison lingo for eavesdropping. I'm sure some listeners are familiar with it. This is a really, really high quality podcast that's recorded right in San Quentin Prison in California, which has recently had a coronavirus outbreak. And it really does a lot to show the humanity of individuals. And I can share more about that later. But that podcast has several episodes from this entire spring where they address what coronavirus has been like for individuals, and you can hear from prisoners themselves about what they think. But obviously this is a structure and a system that is really ripe for an infectious disease to spread. And so it must be very challenging. I think aside from prison, jails are very challenging. We have tens of thousands of people who, you know, go into and out of jail every month in this country. And so you're talking about people from the community who are being incarcerated for short periods of time and coming back out is really ripe for seeding jails. I think I heard a statistic that in Illinois, about 1 in 5 cases could be connected to a correctional facility in that state alone. And so they're just places in our country which are not well designed to be able to deal with this. My patients have also gone on lockdown even in halfway houses after being released. When an individual comes with coronavirus. I had a patient of mine who was released because of his medical comorbidities and was staying with his mom for a short period of time, but she was elderly and did not feel safe with him to be at home. So she decided to say, I can't have you here anymore. And he kind of said to himself, well, if I'm not worth it, then maybe I'm not worth anything. And he actually relapsed on alcohol. He got hospitalized, he got better, and then he got sick and died of the coronavirus just last month after getting released from prison. So these are, I think the individuals who are just involved are at risk, whether or not they find themselves behind bars or outside of bars. It's a risky period no matter what.
Wow.
Thank you. You know, Mike, you mentioned this earlier when we were talking a few minutes ago, and so I want to kind of roll this in. And I think there's obviously some strong connections with COVID-19 as well. But as you know, there's unequivocal empirical evidence that demonstrates that that systemic racism is a component of the U.S. justice system. And so, since our panel focuses on your expertise in prison ministry and also in parolee medicine, what we'd like to hear a little bit about is how have you seen racism and the impact of racism affect the programs that both of you work with? Mike, why don't you start?
I think mass incarceration is an experiment by our society that has vastly disproportionately affected people who have brown and black skin. And like you said, there's unequivocal evidence to support that. When you look at the statistics, they're pretty staggering about what the rates are for black and brown people to be in prison for a drug charge compared to a white person. And again, drugs are used and sold by races at about similar rates. So these are things that are disproportionately enforced and sentenced in law enforcement. So the whole entire backdrop of incarceration, I think, is all about racism, or the majority is about racism, particularly with the prison explosion that we had starting in the 1980s, where we increased our prison population sevenfold. So aside from that, I mean, every single encounter I have is steeped in my understanding of my own racism and people's stigma that they have against healthcare, against institutions, which are generally run by white people who have more power and more privilege in public life. And so I expect there to be a path to earn trust of patients I have who are brown and black, and even white patients who are dealing with other forms of stigma that they carry around with themselves. So that's something I'm aware of, and acknowledging that I come from places where my experiences are limited, where I too have my own racial implicit and sometimes explicit biases. Being aware of those puts me on the path to try to be anti-racist, to acknowledge that it's a process, and hopefully gets people to trust me a little bit more, that I'm interested in what they find as their goals for themselves. I think the whole backdrop of this affecting communities of color more makes it much more difficult to get grants, to get money, to get some sort of movement or public support for changing this system we've found ourselves in over the past 30 years. And so I think that's been much more challenging, and obviously really hopeful right now that that perhaps we'll start looking at comprehensive criminal justice reform and not just pigeonhole it to one thing or another, but this whole entire system really needs to be redone.
Thank you, Mike.
I agree. I love reading the Vera Institute information, because they worked so hard on trying to talk about and planning for prison reform. And they have a whole lot on what is happening at present with the whole racial tension and just the actual wrong direction we have been going in. When I went into the prison on Sunday, I said to them, talk to me about racism here. Talk to me about what your experience is, and violence. And there were about 10 women sitting there, and they said, we made choices. We decided that we would make choices when we got here in that particular unit. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, we choose to respect everybody in this housing unit, and we try to have an overflow to the rest of the compound. Everybody's valued, everybody's treated equal. And they said, we had this big conversation since all of this has come out in the media, and we are living more peaceful. So tell the people we want to be about peace. It's really whatever can happen in our lives to create peace. And so I said, in the racism, they said, we don't look out of those eyes here. We're looking out of how to be respectful and appreciate each other. So that was pretty powerful. I was very pleased to hear that. The other piece that I think is really important is as we work for reform in our country as well as in the prison system, is to try to envision something new. It's more than us dislike in our non-acceptance, is to envision something new. And I was so encouraged when I read about a program that's begun in Connecticut at the prison there. It's called True. And it's taken a group of inmates, and I don't know if it's in the whole prison or just 1 or 2 units. And they belong to this program called TRUE, and that means they're working towards truthfulness, which means they look at their own lives and others' lives in this vein of trying to be truthful. The R is respectfulness with society, how they've harmed society, how they will re-enter into society. The U stands for understanding. Understanding what they did that got them there, understanding what they need to do to be better citizens when they leave. And the E they have is to elevate yourself to success and to go that direction. And it's really changed a lot of people's lives. They live, again, talking about respect in that unit. Those are the actual words they use of trying to create this little world that could be similar to the world they want to live in when they get out. You know, and we all know prisons are a microcosm of the whole world. Only it's maybe more intensified there, all the isms that exist.
That's great, and a great segue into first audience questions that I think is relevant right now. Mara Early, an MA in Pastoral Ministry at Boston College, asks, how do you help incarcerated women who are in a state of despair, especially those with children on the outside? How do you engender hope? And I think that Maureen, you'd probably be the one to start this answer.
Well, I would hope that that person would come and seek me out or seek someone out who could help her talk to psych services there, have an opportunity to pray together, to talk together, to see if there's ways of helping them. And then, like you heard about the aftercare program, there's a lot of wonderful volunteers that are willing to help people get on that positive vein that's hopeful to create their future.
I know you have some Boston College students as well do one-on-ones with women, which I think is a very powerful kind of program. Just sit down and talk to them. If
Right, we have a spiritual direction program. Sometimes it's spiritual direction, sometimes it's how to get through the college class. It's the one-to-one with the opportunity to talk about whatever's important in your life.
That's great. Did you want to add anything to that, Mike?
Most of the people who see me are men.
Right.
For our for whatever reason, there's another model down the road who just works with the women's prison that's close by. But in this topic in general of giving hope, I mean, I think you have to be like enthusiastically with and for people. You have to be in their core. I think the people who've responded like we're gonna help you, we're gonna be there, here's my card, here's my number, this is my social worker, this is my navigator, you know, and doing what we can. At the same time, like you can't just be someone's parent either. And so you set boundaries and also encourage people to grow, you know, and do that independence, because I can't change the world right now and make this easier. You have to adapt to the constraints that we have as an institution like Denver Health, or as a society in the way that our whole entire criminal justice system is designed. And I think people understand that. But I think that unflinching support is something that people maybe haven't necessarily felt in a long time when they get out of prison. And so I think people do appreciate that.
We have another question from the community. This question comes from Quasi Sargodi Mensa from the BC Libraries here. And he asked, could you talk about your experience with immigrant prisoners? More broadly, how can you help meet the needs of prisoners who come from many different backgrounds and experiences?
The immigrant prisoners at the facility where I am, everyone's invited to every single thing we have. It's open, and many of them seek help themselves. At different points, we've had different people that spoke different languages and had to seek translators, but those are available. So reaching out the best we can. is what we're doing.
Mike, have you had any experiences that you could speak to?
I work with diverse populations, and so I think a lot of healthcare environments are prepared to be able to do that. So it's something that I've received ongoing education about. Check your assumptions at the door. Make sure that you provide access. Be prepared to do extra for individuals who have other barriers, like linguistic barriers, to receiving what they need or what their goals are, and be willing to do those things. I wasn't sure if the question was more so about immigrations and custom enforcement facilities. I know in our area, there's like a potluck program. A lot of people get released from there, and they basically just don't have anywhere to go and need a place to stay and food and stuff. And so there are opportunities to be involved there. But like working with any diverse population, understand as much as you can your own biases and be open. Assume positive intent. Same thing I say for my 3-year-old, assume positive intent. Other people are really trying to do what's best for themselves and for others. And then ask questions, try to learn.
Great. Thank you.
Here's a question from Caroline Blessing, class of 2019, admissions in the School of Social Work. She asks, I have an interest in policy as it relates to mass incarceration. Can you speak to any experience you may have with prison reform on a macro level? Any thoughts on that?
I really don't have any thoughts on that.
My experience is fledgling, but as you hear me talk, I'd imagine you could tell that, I'm interested and excited about that. Because I think structural change is needed to change a lot what people's lives look like on a day-to-day basis. We have an organization called Criminal Justice Reform Coalition in Colorado that lobbies and fights for criminal justice reform and has been for a long time. So that's something I contribute to and something that I stay aware of for sure. I try to work with my institution to get more money for a program like mine where we're actually trying to make a difference and people are re-entering. There's another program at Denver Health that I think initially was grant funded and now has more kind of ongoing funding that helps people who have opiate use disorders get onto maintenance opiate therapy like methadone or Suboxone. And then once they're released from jail, follow up immediately at Denver Health within a day or two in order to continue that treatment. It's shown to save lives and prevent people from overdosing. So those are small things. I think the really encouraging thing here actually was said by Barack Obama a couple of weeks ago that a ton of policy is state driven. Most prisoners are in state prisons, not in federal prisons. And so if you want to get involved, this is just state politics. And so if you get some momentum or movement around it, you can make really significant change, as we've seen in many states who have are looking into making huge changes that no one ever thought possible with law enforcement.
That's such a great point. I think the need is so big. You can approach this problem from so many angles, from being involved in volunteering to the politics to, there's so many angles to the problem because the problem is just so big. So it's kind of, where do you want to start kind of question.
Can I make a suggestion for this young woman who just asked a question?
Yes.
She does look more into the policy making and changing reform. Maybe she could encourage people to look at reducing the nation's reliance on incarceration. What if we learn to look different ways and envision a different vision rather than locking everybody up? That maybe new ideas.
That one.
Evidence suggests that mass incarceration has not made us safer.
Right.
It's really disheartening when we realize what we've done over the past few decades. And we don't lock up a lot of white people who are using and selling drugs. And we manage to be comfortable more or less with our level of safety right now.
Celeste, do you have a question you want to ask?
I can actually, why don't I ask a question that comes from both Crystal and I, but also we seem to be getting a number of questions from the community about this. So I'm going to kind of fold a number of questions together.
Great.
Many individuals are interested not only in the community that we've been hearing from in the question and answer, but also when Crystal and I talked about this, many people are interested in a role in improving our communities. So one of the things we'd like to do in closing out our questions today is ask you about what are the ways that we could offer our listeners to help make change? Do you have ideas? Whether they're financial, do you have ways that people could contribute, whether interactively through volunteerism, through spreading information? I think we've learned over the last several months that if social change is going to happen, it needs to happen from all directions and in many ways. And so we'd just like your thoughts and your advice on what are some of the ways that you think our audience members, particularly young people, it seems like we're getting a lot of student-driven questions around, well, what can I do? Particularly around the idea of the COVID story that you told, Mike. I think that impacted a lot of the listeners today as well.
I can go first. There's a lot to do. I'd say read. You know, reading is just so amazing, especially with areas that one isn't very familiar with. It's just mind-blowing. So one of my favorite books is The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which is a really strong history of kind of this theory that this mass incarceration is just a new racial caste system that is a remodeling of slavery and Jim Crow laws. Just Mercy, I think, is one of the most hopeful books I've read by Brian Stevenson. I think one of the lines that's my favorite is, you know, we can't have something where we define people by the worst thing that they've ever done. And we can't just go around holding people to account for that for the rest of their lives. Imagine if any one of us had to apply for a job, and while we were at that job, we had to say what the worst thing we'd ever done was. You know, just be unbelievable. But that's essentially what we have people do for decades after their felony. Listen to Ear Hustle. It's an amazing podcast. You'll hear about people who get into groups and play magic in prison. You'll hear about how people look out for birds that they found. You'll hear about people who are training for marathons. You'll hear about how resourceful individuals are. You'll hear a man who committed a really heinous crime do kind of like a mock, what am I looking for? Not reconciliation, but restorative justice exercise with a woman who suffered a similar crime. And they'll talk to each other about what their experiences were like. It's light and heavy. It's really amazing, I think, at opening our eyes to the humanity of individuals who are justice involved. So I think educating. I think on like a local level, you can consider going to the institutions that you represent and asking, do we ask about people's incarceration history? Should we actually be making people check the box? At an institution like mine, who serves a lot of people from communities that are just racked with structural racism and incarceration, shouldn't we be like taking that into consideration, that maybe we want people who have had that history so that we're a more sensitive place for people who have that as part of their lives. So we're more informed. So we show mercy that we aspire to have, that we're taught by our faith. So I think that those are some of those things that we can do.
Like, I think Be in the Box is really excellent to have people work towards having that removed from the applications people have to fill out. My experience has been that bringing people inside the institution is transforming. You can read, which is wonderful. I'm not putting that down in any way. But stepping into that institution and meeting people face to face tears down all of what the majority of what the media has put out, that these are monster people and they're violent immediately in your face. Just the opposite. And Crystal maybe can speak to that the people I work with are some of the people I really admire. people who have made a mistake and want to begin their lives again. So if people want to get involved in prison ministry or prison work, it would really be good if you could go in for some good reason, not to just view the folks, but to go in to offer programs or services, which right now the women are dying to have since everything is shut off. Programs, services, they love religious services, they love to pray, they love to speak to whatever God they know, and they like that support. And when people choose to go in, it says to the inmates, somebody cares about me, somebody thinks about me. Maybe when I get out, it'll be much different than I expect. Maybe I'll be accepted and supported and people will help. So that would be my biggest cry. Come in first and see what it's all about, because then you'll want to go back and write the policies and change those situations that we now have.
I want to add one thing, because I'm sure there's someone out there listening who's been listening to every single session of this summer who's just thinking, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. And as someone who has participated in intersection retreats, halftime retreats, and was told to light the world aflame when I was at Boston College, don't underestimate the importance of being joyful, of following a joy, because that's what sustains, the people around you and enjoying what you do. So certainly this is really overwhelming stuff. And the reason why I can still kind of do it or consider putting myself more and more into it is that it makes me feel alive. It makes me feel like I'm doing something that's important. And at the end of the day, it doesn't leave me super, super depleted, and I can keep on coming back. There are other things that would, and I did not choose them. Walked away from, I said no to so many other things so I could say yes to this. And most people will end up doing that. So don't feel like you have to do everything on a to-do list that you've heard from the BC show over this whole entire summer.
The best of all is God shows up in this whole picture.
So we've got about 1 minute left here. Are there any, and that kind of felt a bit like a closing remark, and your wife, Mike, was asking, what are your final thoughts moving forward? So I just want to put that out there. Is there any final word before we give a few words about the upcoming events that you just want to say to our community listening now?
My wife is my muse and my inspiration.
That's a great one.
I'm excited that we are talking about this and that hopefully we can look to envision something better.
Yes.
Hopefully.
A lot of good work being done.
Right. Well, I absolutely want to thank Sister Maureen and Dr. Frank for coming on today and sharing their experiences and their time and their expertise. I think both of you have shown so much humility and kindness, and these are things that we desperately need in our society today. And hopefully all of us can take some of your advice to heart and certainly work to start to make the changes that are so needed right now. I want to also thank Crystal for guiding us down this path and for all the work she does at Boston College and beyond. So thank you very much, Crystal, for spending the evening with me. I'd like to highlight to our audience our upcoming show at 6, which is going to be on July 17th. And it's going to focus on athletics, health, and the common good. And both Mark Herzlich and Daniel Conti Herzlich are going to be on the show. They're both graduates of Boston College. And it'll be hosted by Barry Gallup, who is actually our Senior Associate Athletics Director and also a BC graduate. And as a final reminder, you need to make sure that you register for each session you want to attend. As you know, the registration is really quick and brief, but each show has a different webinar link, so you need to register for each one. And so if you have questions, you just want to go to our webpage, which is bc.edu/show@6 to see the next segments. And while you're there, you can check out the archives. All of the shows are recorded, so if you haven't been able to watch them all, you're able to do that now. So I think what I'd like to end with is just to tell all of you today to be well, to stay safe, and good night from Boston College. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.